Welcome, you are watching Eastern Europe Review, brought to you by BELSAT TV and TVP World. Today we're delving into the latest updates from Eastern Europe with a spotlight on Russia, Belarus and Ukraine. Stay tuned as we explore the key issues shaping the region. I'm Igor Kuley, and here is what we've prepared for you today. What awaits Russia following Putin's victory in the elections?
I'll be voting for Vladimir Vladimirovich Putin because I believe that this is the man who pulled our country out of such a swamp.
Putin's ally, dictator Lukashenka, prepares for elections and orders officials to search for oil in Belarus.
9 миллионов тонн.
We used to produce 9 million tons of oil. Today we produce 2. What's the matter? Everything has been pumped out? I don't believe it.
And people with no choice, how residents of Siversk live in their homes on the front line.
We live, survive, and have no other way out. Our pensions are small, so we can't afford to go anywhere else and pay for a flat.
In Russia, the curtains have closed on the presidential election, with Vladimir Putin, the current leader notorious for instigating the conflict with Ukraine, maintaining a commanding lead. Analysts anticipate a looming crackdown on dissent within the nation, heightened persecution of regime critics abroad, potential tax hikes, and a complete reorientation of the economy towards a wartime footing. Meanwhile, amidst these developments, the opposition is rallying to devise and present alternative strategies for the future.
Over the last 3 days, presidential elections have been held in Russia and the territories it occupies. The country's authorities made no secret of the fact that these elections were essentially a vote for Vladimir Putin. The president who launched the war in Ukraine did not allow any independent candidates and conducted a lackluster election campaign. The Kremlin promptly declared the outcome of this race as obvious. This is Putin's 5th term. He has been in power for almost 25 years. In Russia, a generation has already grown up which doesn't remember the country having any other ruler.
I grew up under Putin, just like that, but I don't think I'll grow attached to this politics.
We're the generation of the future. It's up to us now to decide what future generations will thank us for.
I believe that our generation is a generation that strives for something new, strives for novelty, and strives for patriotism.
These are the opinions of participants in state youth forums. Nowadays, a lot of propaganda is aimed precisely at the younger generation. Many of them are voting in this year's elections for the first time. For the older audience, it's all standard. Patriotism equals support for the war, and freedom of choice equals full agreement with the position of the authorities. There's stuffing of ballot boxes with ballot papers at polling stations, censorship in the media, and uncontrolled electronic voting. For Vladimir Vladimirovich.
I'll be voting for Vladimir Vladimirovich Putin because I believe that this is the man who pulled our country out of such a swamp.
The Russian opposition is facing persecution abroad following the death in prison of one of its leaders, Alexei Navalny. Members of his team are receiving threats. And Navalny supporter Leonid Volkov was attacked with a hammer in Vilnius. Lithuania has long been a center of political emigration, where the opposition regularly discusses future strategies for opposing Putin's regime.
I think Navalny's murder is not just a black swan that flew to Putin of its own accord. It's a huge black flying cow that has very serious hooves. We can see now by the convulsive actions authorities are taking, they don't know what to do with this cow.
Navalny's death, despite the tragedy of the situation, may help consolidate the Russian opposition abroad, according to its representatives. At the same time, the question of the possibility of open activity in Russia is finally closed. We have now reached the point where Yulia Navalnaya has already said travel document for stateless persons. It is clear that she has a vague idea of how to do it, but it has become obvious that the future of the Russian opposition will be shaped outside of Russia. The Russian authorities are not prepared to end the war. Part of the Russian opposition advocates for military involvement on the side of Ukraine. There are also discussions about forceful resistance against the regime within Russia itself. However, Currently, the Kremlin and its security forces are taking a hardline stance against any opponents of the regime. People receive lengthy prison sentences for any form of resistance. The interests of our country include, of course, Ukraine's victory, but they are not reduced only to the victory of Ukraine. They are very diverse, and it seems to me that the Russian opposition should first and foremost think about Russia. Military experts suggest that Putin may announce a new mobilization after his inauguration to continue the aggression. Many cautiously predict a potential war with NATO countries during this period if Ukraine loses. The head of the Kremlin will now be in power for at least 6 more years. It appears that only military defeat can stop him.
The elections in Russia are unfolding without suspense, their outcome becoming evident even now. However, for Vladimir Putin's closest ally, the Belarusian dictator Lukashenka, elections are looming only next year. The politician pretends he hasn't fully decided yet whether to participate in the campaign. Against the backdrop of Western sanctions and declining exports, Lukashenko is desperately hoping for a miracle. This week he has ordered his officials to search for large reserves of oil in the country.
Alexander Lukashenka, the Belarusian dictator, called a meeting at his Palace of Independence to announce personnel changes among officials. Lukashenka has appointed individuals to positions ranging from the heads of local authorities to the deputy head of presidential affairs. Mykolai Shkred, his security service manager, a judo and sambo enthusiast, has been tasked with overseeing Lukashenka's office affairs.
Mykolai Shkred is a person with a sports background, a security guard who holds a position because the management of the president's affairs is a business structure. He is a trusted person from Lukashenka's inner circle, and naturally, security personnel become close to the first person in a country that does not particularly communicate with the outside world.
The head of Lukashenka's administration is now 30-year-old Alexander Yahorau, a former chairman of the board of a bank.
Lukashenko says that the entire block of control, economic and financial management, will be transferred to the presidential administration. This is not a change. This is the same concentration of power inside Lukashenko's structure.
Lukashenko began reshuffling positions of officials well before the 2020 elections, which didn't yield any results for the government system. Is he preparing to run in the next presidential election? Here is how he responded to reporters last month.
The more the opposition stress out you, me and society, the sooner I will go to these elections. Well, if you need clarification, then I will tell you absolutely seriously and honestly. I can't say anything new yet, because there is still a year ahead of the presidential elections, and a lot can change.
This is not the only controversial statement. Speaking on March the 5th to members of the Belarusian Women's Union, Lukashenko also mentioned that he had not yet decided on his candidacy for the next presidential elections. Meanwhile, the security forces and the military have already been informed that they will be under the leadership of the dictator in the coming years. Lukashenko has tasked them with minimizing the risks of both real and hybrid war with the West.
Personnel policy, economic policy, and policies in many other areas are beginning to be more and more influenced by security issues.
Lukashenko has also replaced the heads of several enterprises in the industrial sector, the Belaz mining dump truck plant and the Atlant refrigerator plant. With sanctions making it difficult to sell world-famous Belarusian dump trucks, the new manager is focusing on markets in Russia and China.
Diversification of product types includes heavy hydraulic excavators weighing 200 tons and having a capacity of 12 cubic meters, as well as graders weighing 70 tons. This technology has no equivalents either in China or in Russia. By expanding the line, we strive to maintain capacity, even with a decline in the market for mining dump trucks.
Due to sanctions, Lukashenko is also pinning hopes on mineral resources. The dictator mentioned deposits of oil reserves, which were discovered and nearly exhausted during the Soviet era. Lukashenka has ordered the extraction of 5 million tons in a year, because according to his information, Belarus's industrial reserves of oil are approximately 45 million tons.
We used to produce 9 million tons of oil. Today we've produced 2. What's the matter? Everything has been pumped out? I don't believe it.
Just as oil extraction should be based on the expertise of professionals rather than the directives of politicians, the economy should also be guided by efficient decision-making. However, in Belarus, the situation is reversed. If officials cannot execute the dictator's directives ahead of the presidential elections and show signs of growth in the domestic economy, they will be replaced.
Just 8 kilometers from the front lines, residents of the Ukrainian town of Siversk in the Donetsk region are clinging to survival through mutual aid and journeys to nearby settlements to procure food. Once home to approximately 10,000 people, Siversk has been utterly devastated by Russian forces. Now only the elderly, people with disabilities and abandoned animals endure amidst the ruins. Our correspondents ventured into the ravaged area to bring you to the poignant stories of sorrow and suffering endured by the local residents.
The rumble of Ukrainian army helicopters passing by, tanks rushing to battle on empty streets. This is the frontline town of Siversk in the Donetsk region. Shrapnel-strewn fences resembling a sieve through which the sun's rays pass. Houses destroyed by bombs and shells. This is the residential area of Siversk, located just 8 kilometers from the front line.
It's scary when they shoot. Sometimes we go down to the cellar and sometimes we go upstairs. You know, my house is my fortress. It's scary. Sometimes when we heard explosions, we'd hide by crawling in the vegetable garden.
Vyacheslav and his wife live in Siversk, and their house is relatively intact. The man says that sometimes shells fall into the vegetable garden, and he has to replace the windows, which are blown out by the blast wave. He also patches holes in the roof.
We manage on our own when things break. I've replaced the windows on that side. We've done something here and there.
We live, survive, and have no other way out. Our pensions are small, so we can't afford to go anywhere else and pay for a flat.
About 1,000 people are living in the city. Some of the locals have moved to the suburbs. For example, Nadia has lost the roof over her head, and now she's living with her sister.
They destroyed my flat. I used to live in Dolomchik, and I had an apartment, but they destroyed it. So I had to come here to the suburbs to live with my sister.
The wires on the power lines look like willow branches, hanging from poles and swaying in the wind. There is no electricity or heating because the gas pipes have been punctured by shrapnel. Locals say that life is somewhat easier in the suburbs, where they have access to firewood for heating ovens and water from surviving wells. Vera moves around in a wheelchair. She mentions that there is no essential medical care available in the town. Although there is a therapist on her street who assists her with medication, she is unable to reach the hospital by herself.
Up on the hill, there's a hospital. There is a dentist there. He comes during the day, but it's very far away. For example, for me, it's a long way to go. And so there is no such service to help me. There is no such doctor.
Up there, that's how the locals refer to the high-rise neighborhood. Journalists are prohibited from entering due to the continuous bombing and shelling. 8 kilometers from the front, the rumble of warplanes can be heard.
Flying. Where is it flying? What is it? That's how we live, with our ears to the ground.
The town's shops contribute to making life easier. According to the locals, there are a few private houses where residents can buy water, food, sweets, and tobacco. Animals are seeking new owners who can provide food and care for them, despite the shortage of supplies.
Having these cats, what else can we do? We feed them all. Yes, yes, you are my good boy. Have you eaten? I wish it would end sooner.
All these people want one thing, a quick end to the war.
And that's all for today. Eastern Europe Review will be back next Sunday. I'm Igor Kuley. Please stay with us here on TVP World.